Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I am Brenna. I'm the Director of Education here at Test Innovators. And what I'll be talking about today is everything that you need to know about the SSAT. And this webinar is being recorded. Throughout, feel free to type any questions that you may have in the comments. And if we have time at the end, I'll answer as many of those as I can, and any that we don't get to, I'll respond to afterwards along with the recording. I know that there may be many different kinds of people here today. So you may be a parent or a student, family. You may work with schools that we work with. You may be an administrator at a school, a tutor. If you have any questions that are specific to your situation, again, please don't hesitate to contact us also after the webinar. So let me begin with who we are. Test Innovators, we are the leading test prep platform for the SSAT and the ISEE, and we've helped over 60,000 students get into the most selective schools. And these are just a few of the schools that students who've used our platform have been admitted to. From the years that we've spent helping students with test prep, here's what we know. Standardized test taking is a skill that you can master, but it's different from other types of tests that students take. And so like all skills, you have to learn and practice in order to improve. And once students have mastered this skill, you're able to demonstrate your knowledge most effectively when you take the test. Second, advances in technology have made it much easier to prepare for the test because technology allows you to quickly identify your strengths and weaknesses, and then it provides the best tools so you prepare efficiently and effectively. And those two tenets form the foundation of the tools and resources that we've developed to help students prepare for the SSAT, and they also inform the strategies that I'll be sharing with you in today's webinar. So as I'm saying, over the years we've developed some key strategies for success on the test, and those have come from a few sources. So working with admissions departments, feedback from our students and network of tutors, and also from data collected in our system. And some of the most important data that we collect are official SSAT test scores and admissions results. We've compiled that data and made it available, and we'll include a link to that resource along with the recording. It is extremely important to know what scores make you a competitive applicant at your target schools. Here's an example of what our school data looks like. If your student is interested in this school, you can see at a glance that scores in the yellow or green bands are considered competitive. Of course, anytime you're thinking about SSAT scores and admissions, it's very important to remember that there are many parts of the application that influence admissions decisions, but this can help give you a good benchmark of the SSAT scores that we have found make students competitive applicants. And then for students who work with the Test Innovators platform, we take it just a step further. Your practice test scores are put in the context of your target schools so you can quickly see how you compare. In this example, for the first school on the students list, the practice scores are looking really good for the verbal and the reading section, but it looks like they have some work to do on math. And now this is the same student, the same scores, but a different school on their list. And you can quickly see that for this school, the students' practice scores aren't quite competitive yet, and they have some more work to do before the official test. So let's talk about preparing for that test. I'm going to start today by taking you through an overview of test content. Then we'll talk about some overall test strategies that apply to the entire test. And after that, I'll take you through each section and highlight some strategies specific to each one. And that will include talking about the SSAT essay and why it's so important. So let's get started. Schools use the SSAT to assess whether a student is a good fit at their school. Part of that is that they want to know how they can handle the academics, of course. But something that you may not know is that schools are also looking for information on how students will fit in socially. And I'll talk more about that a bit later. The SSAT has 5 sections, a verbal section, reading section, 2 quantitative sections or math sections, and then an essay or writing sample. Students can take the test multiple times. Our recommendation is always to sign up for, plan for 2 testing dates. That way, if the first test date serves essentially as a trial test, if it goes well, that's perfect and you're done. But if there's any room for improvement, that's okay too. You already have another testing date available to you. So as of right now, you have a few testing dates still available. So it's a good idea to plan around having at least a couple of those be options for you when taking the test. And last of all, the SSAT is administered on paper, which is important to remember for everything related to working on paper, and especially filling out bubble sheets and making sure not to make mistakes there. There are a few different levels of the test. The elementary level of the test is for application to grades 4 and 5. The middle level is for grades 6 through 8, and then the upper level is for students applying to high school, so grades 9 through 12. Really important to remember with this, because each of the levels of the test is for multiple grade levels, students at the younger end of any one of these ranges will be seeing some content that may seem very advanced to them. So very important to remember that scoring is normative according to grade. Thus, if you are an 8th grader taking the upper level test for application to 9th grade, you will only be compared to other 8th graders who are applying to 9th grade, which means that if you're seeing something that seems extremely difficult, it probably seems that difficult to all of the other students your age as well. And so hopefully that can relieve a bit of the anxiety that otherwise might come with seeing some somewhat advanced material. So, important, you are only compared to students your age. The middle and upper levels of the test are the most frequently taken of the two. The test lasts 2 hours and 35 minutes. There are 2 breaks during the test. So you get a 5-minute break after the writing sample, which is your first section, and then there's a 10-minute break after the reading section, which is the 3rd section of the test. And altogether, in that 2 hours and 35 minutes, you have 150 multiple choice questions and then the writing prompt. And for each of those multiple choice questions, you have 5 answer choices. The elementary level of the test is a little bit shorter, so it's just 1 hour and 35 minutes. You just have 1 break, which is a 15-minute break after the verbal section. And it's a bit of a shorter test, of course, in terms of questions as well. But same general structure where you have 5 answer choices for each of those multiple choice questions. So now that you know what the test looks like, let's talk about test prep strategy. There are several factors that will go into determining your individual preparation plan. And those include how well you know the material initially, how much time you have to prepare before you're taking that official test, what your time management skills look like right now, and then, of course, how many times you'll be able to take the official test. So will you be able to take a second one, a third one? These are all factors that you'll consider. Since there is a good amount of time for everyone who's preparing right now, we'll focus on strategies that give you some leeway in terms of your preparation. Regardless of the answers to all of those questions on the previous slide, the first step in every preparation process is always to take a full-length practice test or benchmark. And taking that practice test, no matter when your official test is, it will give you familiarity with the test style and difficulty and content so that you know what to expect when you're going into the official test. The other important role that it will play is allowing you to identify your strengths and weaknesses so that you know how to prepare. How should you be focusing your time? Where should you be spending it? So some of the things that you'll look for in the results of that practice test will be, were there concepts that you didn't know? Did you manage your time effectively? Did you use elimination strategies? Things like this. So where do you find these full-length practice tests that you need to start with? You can find full-length practice tests, of course, on Test Innovators, at various testing centers and tutoring centers, and also at other sites around the web. A couple of things that you want to look for in those practice tests. It's very important that the test is an accurate reflection of current test material so that it's actually preparing you to know what to expect when you get to the official test. You'll want to have access to quick scoring, and it's also really great if there's an online testing option that can give you some timing data. So for example, with our platform, we show students exactly how they allocated time on every section of the test. Effective time management is so critical to success on the SSAT. This is very important feedback. So on this graph, what you can see, the y-axis shows the question numbers, the x-axis is the duration of the section, and it shows exactly how long you took on each question throughout the duration. So with this student, we can see that they went through every question of the section, and then they returned and checked their work for most of the questions. Insights like these are critical to help students become effective test takers and to foster a reflective process for learning. As you prepare for the SSAT, there are two important strategies to know that apply across the entire test, and the first of those relates to the wrong answer penalty. I'll provide you with a link that will give you more detailed information on the reasoning behind the strategy after the webinar, but the strategy is essentially the following. To start off with, what is this? On the SSAT, there is a wrong answer penalty. Students lose a quarter point for wrong answers. Clearly, it's important for students to be aware of the penalty because that scoring model is different from that of most in-school tests. Our recommendation is still to answer each question. Simplifying your test strategy improves confidence, and especially anytime that you've eliminated any answer choices, you've increased your chances of earning points by guessing. The second overall strategy for the entire test is time management strategy. The way this is going to work is that you'll essentially group questions by difficulty. So think of the questions as being easy, medium, and hard. As I said previously, using your time effectively on the SSAT is very important. Every single correct answer gives you the same number of points. So your goal is just to answer as many questions correctly as possible. You don't want to waste valuable time on a hard question when you could instead be answering 3 easy questions correctly in the same amount of time. So every time you read a question, you'll ask yourself, do I know how to do this? And if you do, the answer is yes, absolutely. That's an easy question, and you should do it. If the answer to that question is probably, if I had enough time, you should mark that question for later. That's a medium question. And if the answer is, I'm really not sure how to do this question at all, you should skip it. So after you do that for every question of the section, you'll come back through and go to all of the questions that you had marked, those medium questions. Answer those, and only if you have time remaining at the very end should you try the hard questions that you skipped. Note, make sure that when you skip a question, you don't get off on your bubble sheet. With that, let's get into the section. So we'll start with the verbal section. For the middle and upper levels of the test, you have 60 questions to answer in 30 minutes. And for the elementary level of the test, you have 30 questions to answer in 20 minutes. And this section has 2 types of questions. So it starts off with synonyms, and then the second half is analogies. And the synonym questions look something like this. You have a single word, and then you have to choose the best synonym for that word from among the 5 answer choices. And this is the example of the type of word you might see on the upper level of the test. The strategy for synonyms questions is to always begin by covering up the answer choices. Test writers tend to be tricky, and they'll put some tricky wrong answers there that might fool you if you look at them first. So always come up with your own answer first. It doesn't have to be a perfect synonym or definition. It's just to make sure you formulate in your mind what you think the word means before you go and look at the answer choices. So after you've come up with your own answer, avoiding being tricked by test writers, then find the answer choice that's closest to yours. eliminating any of the answer choices that are obviously not in line with the synonym, definition, phrase, feeling that you came up with associated with that word. The preparation strategy beyond that for these synonyms depends a bit on the amount of time you have to prepare. The way you're going to start is always by practicing that strategy, making sure that for all of the words you do know, you always get the right answer. After that, studying vocabulary is a very good idea, since synonyms largely just rely on having a very strong vocabulary. And when it comes to studying vocabulary, the key is to make sure that the vocabulary you use is at the appropriate level. And along with that, learning roots can be beneficial, since roots can be applied to many different words. After you study words, always make sure to practice actually implementing your new knowledge of words with test-style questions, and make sure you're developing good test-taking habits. So the second half of the verbal section is analogies, and students have to answer questions that look like this after they get through the synonym portion. The strategy for analogy questions is to hone the ability to find the relationship between the first pair of words by forming a phrase or sentence that connects the two, and then applying that relationship to the second pair of words. So for instance, looking at this example, we have communication is to telephone, as storage is to. The phrase that connects the first two words of this analogy might be a telephone is something used for communication. Applying that relationship to the second pair of words, we want to find what is something that's used for storage. Well, a locker is something that's used for storage, so answer choice C seems like the best answer. So while the synonyms portion of the verbal section relies heavily on knowledge and vocabulary, the analogy questions mostly just require a new skill. Your strategy is always to find the relationship between the first pair of words, apply that relationship to the second pair of words, and simply select the answer choice for which the relationship holds. Since many students haven't encountered analogy questions like these prior to the SSAT, learning how to form that bridge and then apply it is really the best way to prepare. A couple things to keep in mind with analogies are that you should pay attention to order. Order matters. Talk is to shout is different from shout is to talk. Shout is the louder, more emphatic form of talk. If it said shout is to talk, it would be a different analogy, different relationship. Also, pay attention to parts of speech. Even if you're not sure exactly what the relationship is or what the words are, the parts of speech must always match. So anytime they don't, you can easily eliminate those answer choices. It can be helpful to know the types of relationships that you might be looking for in analogies. So let's talk about some of the most common ones. There are synonym analogies, so where the words mean the same thing, such as kind is to compassionate. There are antonyms, where they mean opposite things. Loud is to quiet. There are degree relationships, where one of the words is a stronger form of the other or a weaker form of the other. So for instance, stomp is to tiptoe. They're both forms of walking, but stomp is sort of a stronger form, more emphatic form. Tiptoeing is a weaker form. There are cause-effect relationships. So rain is to flood. Rain could cause a flood. Definition or purpose. So the purpose of a mop is to clean things. Part whole, so we have a chapter as part of a book. Type kind, an ape is a kind of primate. And then characteristic, so soda is to bubbly, where we have some characteristic of soda. With that, let's get into quantitative sections. For the middle and upper levels of the test, there are 2 quantitative sections. You have 25 questions to answer in 30 minutes for each of those. And then for the elementary level of the test, there's just 1 quantitative section and 30 minutes to answer those 30 questions. All of the math that you'll see at every level of the SSAT relies heavily on a strong foundation in arithmetic. You have to be comfortable with addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division with positive and negative integers, fractions, and decimals. Many questions also require strong algebra skills. You'll have to work with variables to solve equations, simplify expressions, and certainly to work with word problems. Some other subjects that you'll see on the test will be geometry, probability, and statistics. The best way to get a sense of the types of questions you can be asked on the SSAT is to take practice tests, and from there determine what you need to review or study in order to have a good foundation in the subjects, the types of questions that you might be asked on the test. This is an example of the type of question that you might see on the upper level of the SSAT. And some of the questions can look very different from questions students have seen before. And getting comfortable with those is important so that you don't freeze up on the official test when you see them. So let's take a look at this question. It says, if n is between 0 and 1, which of the following is the greatest? This question starts out and seems kind of hard. It's very abstract, conceptual. But what if we just pick a value for n? If we just let n equal 1/2, suddenly this question becomes a lot easier because we just have to calculate each of these answer choices, substituting 1/2 for n. So when it comes to preparing for these quantitative sections, the place to begin is always familiarizing yourself with the test. You want to know what to expect so there are no surprises when you get to the official test. Next, you'll want to review content that you've seen before but may not remember well. There are topics on the test that may be concepts you haven't covered in school for a while, and reviewing any of those areas is a really good place to start. And then from there, learn how to be strategic about your time and your test taking. Everything that we talked about in terms of time management strategy, make sure you don't spend much time on questions that you'll have trouble answering or that are very hard for you, or you may not even know what they're talking about. It is a good idea, though, if you have time before the official test, to study some of the new content that you may be less familiar with or not familiar with at all. And as always, make sure to practice any of those new subjects that you've just learned to make sure you'd be able to answer the questions like that when you get to the test. The first step to doing well on any math question is always to read it carefully. You want to avoid making careless errors or calculating the wrong thing. So reading carefully, there are a few things to bear in mind here. Underlining important words and numbers, especially in word problems, is very helpful to help you keep track of what you'll need to solve the problem. Pay attention to units. Units can trip you up, and you may suddenly find yourself calculating the wrong thing entirely. So those are another thing to underline and pay attention to. Drawing pictures or diagrams can help you keep track of the information as you're going through questions, especially if you're having trouble figuring out what it's talking about. As I'm sure students have heard many times before in their math classes, write your work down. It's one of the easiest and best ways to avoid making careless errors. And last, on every question, make sure that you verify at the end of the problem, before you move on to the next question, what you were supposed to find. What was the question asking you for, and is that what you had just calculated? Some strategies that you can use for math questions are to use estimation to eliminate answer choices. So before you even start doing calculations, think about what the right answer should be. Should it be positive? Should it be negative? Should it be bigger or smaller than any of the numbers that are given in the question? Use those estimations to help eliminate answer choices, and sometimes they'll even be sufficient to find the correct answer. Remember also that you can use the answer choices when you aren't sure how to solve the problem from scratch with just the question. You can substitute answer choices sometimes, and that can help you work backwards to solve. And then last, you can sometimes pick values to substitute, as in the case of the problem we looked at previously, where if we just substituted a value for n, the question got much simpler. Which takes us to the reading section. Here, for the middle and upper level of the test, you have 40 questions to answer in 40 minutes. and that also includes 8 reading passages. And then for the elementary level of the test, it's a bit shorter, so you have 28 questions to answer in 30 minutes. Time management can be hard for the reading section. You have to both read what can be fairly long passages and answer all of the questions. So if you find you have any trouble reading quickly enough to answer all of the questions, practice skimming through passages to find the most important information. Remember though, as you're doing this and practicing, it is generally better to get through most of the test, taking your time, answering every question carefully and correctly, than to rush through the entire section and end up missing most of the questions. Practice and find the balance that works well for you. Some strategies that you can use for the reading section that will be helpful. At the end of reading a passage, always ask yourself, so what? And put in words, whether it's on paper or it can just be in your head, what you think the main point of the passage was. And that will help you not just with main idea questions, but with every question on the passage, because it will shape how you find correct answer choices and also eliminate answer choices that aren't in line with the point of the passage. And then perhaps the most important thing in my mind with reading comprehension is to always find evidence for answer choices. There must be evidence for the correct answer, because that is the only information that students have when they're doing reading comprehension. If you ever find you're unable to find specific line numbers, actual evidence from the text to support an answer choice, it's probably not the right answer. And last, and this is related to the strategy for synonyms, is to think of your own answer before you read the answer choices, since you can sometimes be tricked by the test writers if you read those answer choices first. And related to this one, always read every answer choice. Sometimes if you just read the first couple and you find an answer choice that looks good, you can sometimes move on without realizing that the best answer choice was actually a little bit later. Maybe it was answer choice D or E and you didn't get to it. So always take the time to read every answer choice for these questions. When it comes to looking at those answer choices and evaluating which ones are right, there are some strategies that can help you determine what might be correct, especially if you're having trouble understanding the passage or figuring out what the right answer is on your own. One thing to watch out for, extreme answer choices. Any answer choices that use words like only, always, never, none, best, worst, things like this are unlikely to be the correct answer. The reading comprehension sections of the SSAT, those authors and passages tend to be fairly neutral. And so if you see things that seem not entirely reasonable or somewhat extreme, they're unlikely to be the correct answer. General answer choices, especially for main idea questions, are often good because they'll encapsulate what the entire passage was about. And here you'll just want to make sure that always the specificity of the question matches the specificity of the answer choice. With that, that brings us to the last section of the SSAT, which is the writing sample. So here, there are a couple different types of prompts you can get, creative prompts and analytical prompts. And depending on the test level, you may get a creative and an analytical, or you may have 2 creative. And for the elementary level, you have a 15-minute picture prompt, actually, so something a little bit different. Students have 25 minutes for the middle and upper level of the test to choose a prompt and then write their response. This section always gets a lot of questions since it's the only ungraded section of the test. Rather, a copy of the essay is sent to schools along with your test scores, and admissions departments use it as an indicator not only of students' writing ability, but also of how they'll fit into the school community academically and personally. So while application essays can be edited extensively by parents, tutors, siblings, friends, the SSAT essay is a pure sample of students' writing. And that makes it a very important component of the SSAT because it demonstrates a good deal about the student in terms of what they thought to write about and how well they express those thoughts. Some things to keep in mind as you're writing this. Outlining before you start to write is really helpful to clarify and structure your thoughts. There you'll decide on your main point, make sure that it answers the given essay prompt, and then demonstrate from there that you can stay focused and on topic throughout the essay. You'll want to have 2 or 3 points that support that main idea, and then give good descriptive details and examples for each of them in your body paragraph. Most importantly for all of this is to really express yourself. Schools are trying to learn more about you and what you care about, so you want to let them get to know you. Of course, through all of this, you want to present yourself in the best possible light and to avoid anything that could even possibly be construed negatively by the reader. And then in the last few minutes of the essay, edit your writing. You'll want to check your mechanics and make sure that you used correct spelling, capitalization, punctuation, and grammar. When it comes to the creative writing prompts, my recommendations are very similar. Outlining first is still a very good, important idea. Always spend the first few minutes doing this to help clarify and structure your thoughts. You'll decide then on your main conflict or event and make sure that your story has a beginning, middle, and end so it's still well structured. You will still want to give good descriptive details throughout to help your story come alive for the reader. And as for the analytical essay, even though it may not seem that this is what you're doing with your creative writing, you are still presenting yourself to admissions departments, so you really want to express yourself. Choose a story, characters, events that say something about you and what's important to you. And again, in the last few minutes, save those to edit your writing. Check your mechanics because you want to make sure that this piece of writing that you're sending along to schools is as polished as it possibly can be. Now that I have finished going into detail about every section of the test, let's put it all back in the context of your preparation plan, which is that you will start by taking a full-length practice test, which you'll use to identify strengths and weaknesses. You'll review your scores in the context of your target schools to see what you're aiming for, and then focus your time on the content and strategies that are going to be most impactful for you, and then practice. Throughout the entire process, we are here to help. So you can visit our site, which is ssatpracticetest.com, to see any of our resources, materials, practice. And here's our contact information for any questions that you may have if you want to reach out. With that, let me see what questions you guys may have here. We'll answer as many of these as we can. All right, so the question is, should you take paper tests for strategy then instead of online practice, and how much? This is a really good question. It's an important question. It's one that comes up frequently. I think it's very important to practice on paper because it does feel different. And the number of times students come to me and have messed up their bubble sheet, and then usually they found out and spent time erasing their entire bubble sheet and refilling it in with the correct answers, is of course not how you want to be spending your time on the test at all. So practicing beforehand is the best way to make sure that you're prepared and you have all the best habits for making sure that you are correctly transferring answers. If you skip around, you're always bubbling in the right answer for the question that you're looking at. So yes, using paper tests is a really good idea. That said, I also think that some online practice is a good idea because it will give you timing feedback, and timing is also really important. Keeping track of if there are questions that you're spending a lot of time on, especially in your first pass through a section, at which point you may not be able to spend as much time on other questions later on in the section. So when it comes to our platform, we have a tool that I think is the best happy medium between the two, which is that you can take your practice tests on paper, but you can essentially fill in an online bubble sheet. So it serves the purpose of helping you practice with, the paper format, and helps you think about how to fill out that bubble sheet. And it can then give you that timing feedback as well. But sort of in the conventional setting, what I'd say is the last practice test you take before the test should be on paper. And that way, you've at least once recently before taking the test, you've just gone through that whole experience and remembered what it's like and sort of practiced that test taking feel, since it's so important. And another great question, which is, what is the difference between the SSAT and the ISEE? There are several differences, and I'll just touch on what I think are some of the most important of those. There are also many similarities. The ISEE has 4 answer choices. Just on the surface of it, I think that may be one of the most important differences, because it completely changes how much information you have to process for every question of the test. So the SSAT, you have 5 answer choices you have to deal with, and the ISEE, you only have 4. When it comes to the verbal section, it's a bit different between the two. So the SSAT, as I just said, has analogies. The ISEE, instead of analogies, you first do the same sort of thing where you have synonyms, but then after that you have sentence completions. So it's basically a fill in the blank in the middle of the sentence. I would say on the whole, when it comes to that, students tend to find sentence completions a bit more intuitive initially, but with practice, I think you can build the skills for either of those. Then when it comes to the math sections, the SSAT has the 2 quantitative sections. The ISEE has something called the quantitative reasoning section, and then it has a math achievement section, and those are a little bit different in their feel. The types of questions differ slightly, but the biggest difference there is that on the ISEE you have what are called quantitative comparison questions, where they have 2 columns that have some kind of expression in each of them, and you have to evaluate whether one of the columns is greater than the other, the values of the 2 columns are equal, or if it can't be determined from the information given. And those questions can definitely throw students for a loop the first time that they see them in particular. And beyond that, they both have a writing sample. The SSAT, you have a choice, and the ISEE, you don't. It just has one of the more sort of personal essay statement questions. And reading is very similar between the 2. And last, and I guess I didn't mention this immediately, it's related to the number of answer choices for each. The SSAT, as I said, has a wrong answer penalty, so if you get the question wrong, you lose a quarter point. The ISEE has no guessing penalty, so whether you leave a question blank or you answer it incorrectly doesn't make a difference. You get 0 points for either of those. With that, it looks like I don't have any other questions. Again, thank you all for joining today, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions throughout the process, and best of luck to everyone on the test.